saying this is, I think, the 16th roadshow event that we've been doing around the country. All of the events are different, and this is the first time we've been on a stage with with a full theatre in front of us. So it's quite a different setup. Maybe to explain where we started and why we're doing the roadshow to begin with. I suppose the impetus to get out on the road and do the roadshow is very much because, as we know, the government for years, successive governments for many years, have been chipping away at Irish neutrality. This was, very real to us when we were in Shannon, actually, and there were 2 US warplanes on the runway as we had our roadshow event in Shannon Airport. This has been going on for decades. There's also Israeli overflights that are carrying weapons from the US through Irish airspace to Israel as Israel perpetrates a genocide. There's also been NATO trainers that have come into Ireland and trained Irish soldiers in Fermoy in County Cork, but also in other places. Just last week, and it may still be there was a NATO ship docked in Dublin Port. And it's also important to mention that 6 counties of Ireland are actually in NATO. So it's really important that we really have a conversation about where our neutrality is at and the direction that we want the country to go in at this particular moment, as the world is really on the brink of all-out war, full-on instability, and the direction that we're all headed is, we're going in a really dangerous direction. So it's a good moment to come together and really assess where Irish neutrality is at. And I suppose why we're doing it now is because the government is in the process of dismantling the triple lock. And often in these conversations, people will think that neutrality is somewhere protected in the Irish constitution or in Irish legislation, when in fact there's no protection for Irish neutrality in the constitution. Often, we have Micheál Martin on the record saying that, Article 29 makes reference to peaceful resolution of conflict, and that's enough neutrality for us. As if that were, something that we should be proud of, when we should really be going much further, actually, with what we understand as an active neutrality. I think it's important to point out as well that neutrality makes warmongers really uncomfortable. And so at a time when Europe is barreling down the road towards war, if you have a member state that is, upholding proudly a neutrality policy, which the Irish people are, the Irish government is not, but the Irish people are. If you have a country that's upholding a proud policy of neutrality as a form of promoting peace when the rest of Europe is very much headed towards war, that's embarrassing for Europe, because then they have to face up to the fact that actually there is an alternative to war. And so that's why there's been such a consistent attack on neutrality from our government, and also from the media. And I'm sure many people here will have seen, articles that have been rolled out almost systematically in, the Irish Times, the Irish Independent, the Examiner, really shamefully, destroying Irish neutrality as though it were something archaic and outdated and something that we should kind of be rid of now, and we should grow up and mature and get on board with the militarization that's going on in Europe. I suppose what's at stake with the triple lock is, it really is the last lever that we have that is the safeguard that keeps us out of war. The triple lock came about in the context of the Nice Treaty. I'm sure most people, or everyone in the room, well actually not everyone because there's a child at the back, but most people here will remember the Nice Treaty, I think. We voted no in the Nice Treaty. And the reason we did that was because we were afraid that if we voted yes in Nice, then we would be dragged into European Union military structures. That wasn't an unfounded fear, because in 1999 Ireland actually became a formal partner of NATO. Also something that the government doesn't talk very much about. But we are a formal partner of NATO. We're not a member of NATO, but we're part of what they call the Partnership for Peace programme. Now, NATO is a war alliance. It has killed millions of people around the world, invading countries illegally for territorial domination, control, expansion. And so to even conceive that an alliance like that would have a partnership for peace is absolutely ludicrous. And then that Ireland, as a neutral country, would form part of that partnership is also incredibly shameful on the part of Ireland. But we've been part of that since 1999, and we've actually deployed Irish troops to Afghanistan on a NATO-led mission, and we were there for a number of years. So our neutrality has been in jeopardy for years. The Nice Treaty came about, we voted no, we wanted to maintain our neutrality. In order for us to vote yes, the second time round, Bertie Ahern brought about what was called the triple lock eventually. So he went around to European capitals and he asked for this carve-out in particular for Ireland, that we would only get Nice over the line if we were guaranteed our neutrality. And that's where the Seville Declaration came about in 2002, and it was allocated a special section within documentation that came out from this European Council meeting in 2002, and on the back of that promise, so it was a solemn promise, political and legal, from Bertie Ahern's government, that we would be kept out of European Union military structures. We voted yes in Nice. Nice was approved, 2003, it came into force, and then very immediately after that, the European Union created the European Defence Agency. And basically since then, with the European Defence Agency, you have a common security and defence policy at European level, and it's becoming increasingly militarised in every way, shape and form you can possibly think of. The triple lock was eventually written into Irish law and what became known as the Defence Amendment Act in 2006. And then the thing came up again in the Lisbon Treaty. So this time again, go to the polls, we all voted no. The reason we did that was because of fear that our neutrality would be jeopardised. And then Brian Cowen's government came along and said, oh, remember that thing called the triple lock? And they reaffirmed their commitment again to the triple lock in the context of the Lisbon Treaty. And then Lisbon was voted in, got over the line, and it came into force in 2009. I don't know if anyone here has read the Lisbon Treaty, I doubt it. It's a very difficult document to read, it's incredibly long, it's very boring, but if you just do a controlled search and you look for NATO, NATO is written into the Lisbon Treaty, and NATO is given priority at European Union legislative level, so the legal document that underpins the very existence of the European Union gives special priority and precedence to NATO as the structure, the apparatus that will provide security within the European Union and to the European Union. And so by virtue of Ireland's membership of the European Union and by virtue of the legal documents that give rise to the existence of the European Union, we are by default and through the back door a member of NATO in many ways. Even if we're not directly a member, but through the EU and also the Partnership for Peace, we're very much embedded in this structure now. Then you come along to kind of the European Union budgets and the way they're rolled out every 7 years. And once we hit the 2014-2020 budget, the European Union started to give unprecedented sums of money to militarisation. And that's been ramping up each year, and now we're in a total bonanza of spending, and Fionn will get into this when he presents the spending that's currently underway. But I suppose the thing is, the triple lock it's the only thing now that's keeping us out of war, because in the Defence Amendment Act, troops can participate in training missions. That's permitted under the 2006 Defence Amendment Act. But to deploy more than 12 troops to a mission overseas, there has to be approval on 3 levels. So 1, there must be approval from the Cabinet. 2, there must be approval from the government or from Dáil Éireann. And 3, the mission that the troops are being sent on must have a UN mandate. And so by trying to dismantle the triple lock, the government is really, is reneging on our commitment as a state to the United Nations, which is coming at a time when the United Nations is under fire literally and figuratively in Palestine. We've seen Israel, kill more healthcare workers that are with the United Nations, more education staff, more UN staff than any other conflict ever. We've had Irish blue helmets come under fire in Lebanon. And at this particular moment, when the UN is struggling for survival, basically, the Irish government has decided that now is the time to remove the triple lock. The only reason that they really want, it would be much easier, they've come out with all of these kind of, you know, absolutely nonsense arguments for why they want to remove the triple lock. There's talk of a Russian veto, no such veto exists. There's talk of us needing to be more responsible within European Union military structures, that we need to pull our weight, that we're freeloaders, all of this, that the triple lock isn't fit for purpose. The only purpose that it's not fit for is sending Irish troops off to war. That's the only thing. Without the triple lock, Irish troops can be sent off to war zones, to conflict. For example, Iraq war, there was no UN mandate for the Iraq war. Had we not had a triple lock, and had we had somebody in the government that thought it would be a good idea, we could very well have sent troops to Iraq for the weapons of mass destruction that actually never existed in the first place. So when you're talking about highly volatile contexts and a lot of pressure, having safeguards in place to make sure we don't deploy troops to those regions is a good thing. But the way it's being framed is that the triple lock and our commitment to the United Nations is actually something that's completely intolerable, is shameful with our European partners, and we need to get rid of it quick and fast so we can deploy troops on EU battlegroups and potentially NATO-led missions. So that's why we rolled out the roadshow. That's why we're here. It involves everyone in this room. Everyone has to take a stand. It will be Irish children who are being sent off to fight in foreign wars, to kill, to be killed, to potentially come home in body bags. So this is very serious stuff at a time when the world is really barreling down the road of more war. We need to do all we can in Ireland to keep ourselves out of that, so that we, not just to save ourselves, so that Ireland stands as an example of what can be done when you actually prioritise peace over war. So that's kind of introduction of where we're at. Fionn is going to talk a lot more about what's going on at European Union level at the moment.
Hello, my name is Mick Wallace. I worked in the Dáil from 2012 to 2019, and I worked in the European Parliament from 2019 to 2024. My brief in the Dáil would have been agriculture, environment, mental health, foreign affairs, but when I went over to Europe, it was exclusively foreign affairs and security, and what they call security and defence. I suppose it's important to note the difference in cultures between the two places when it comes to foreign affairs. So in Dáil Éireann, when you want to talk about what's going on with our like-minded NATO partners, for example, you get these kind of 1 minute back and forth kind of questions and answers with the relevant ministers, and it's very hard for the TDs to get any purchase. The answers are formulaic, very dry, very hard to get a bite. And what you do get is a sense that they don't really want to talk about it. That's kind of not for public consumption. You know, it has to be swept under the carpet. But over in Brussels, it's a completely different kettle of fish. They're very open about what they think Europe is, should be, and was, and so on. And when they talk about foreign affairs, you really get this neo-colonial attitude really shining through. So, for example, when, let's say there's an election, it's even to the point where the former colonial powers kind of try to take responsibility for their former colonies, because in truth they still have their tentacles in those areas. You know, the World Bank and the IMF, you know, are used, and the European development funds and so on are used to kind of have those tentacles still in there. But you'll see when, you know, in Latin America, for example, when Venezuela or Bolivia elect the wrong person, the Spanish are the first ones in there calling for sanctions. They're heading up the reports. They're the loudest on the podiums. When it comes to Eastern Europe, the Germans are up to their neck in it. You know, Hitler wanted to colonize Eastern Europe. He was very open about that. But the Germans seem to have kind of managed to finish the job in true economic pressures, through their kind of pressures for economic reform. The European states are requested to open up their markets to Western capital, privatize their natural resources, their healthcare sector, and so on, the education sectors. But the worst case really, I think, is the Sahel region when it comes to France, and the Germans are there too. But when it comes to this whole band of countries just underneath the Sahara Desert, you really see France. It's a kinetic intervention, and I'll talk about it later because this involves Ireland, because we've had troops there for defence forces there for quite a long time. I suppose Niamh's going to talk more about what the government has been up to sort of attack the Triple Lock, but I suppose I want to go a bit more into what the thinking is at EU level. And I suppose there is a problem here with communication back here to what actually goes on in Brussels, and what's going on with the Commission is quite secretive. Like even the committees over in Brussels are not, there's no real record of them. You can't find out what's being said by some of these people who are so gung-ho. If it was on our screens, we'd be a bit shocked, I think. And this kind of lack of democratic kind of engagement that's available in Ireland is quite striking. We kind of get the ministers and the leaders going over and they report back what Europe thinks, rather than us being shown and kind of talked about it more. And like a really stark example of this is Mick Wallace and Claire Daly put forward a motion, kind of a campaign. We had a presentation in the Dáil in the AV room with the help of Catherine Connolly and Thomas Pringle. And we wanted to bring in another channel on the digital, like the Dáil TV. So you just flip over and get all this stuff that's already recorded. It's all out there. All the work has been done. You just have to employ one extra staff in Brussels to kind of liaise with the people on the ground there for the sort of tech aspect of it. But the Dáil was not interested. They did not want this kind of increased democracy and transparency about what goes on in the European Union. But they're quite clear, about what they think Europe is, and quite gung-ho, especially when it comes to foreign affairs. And even though if we might not get this kind of direct kind of access to the goings-on over at the Parliament and the Commission, you do get sort of tastes of it when certain events kind of break, and you might remember, for example, High Commissioner for Foreign Affairs Joseph Borrell, comparing Europe to a precious garden that need to be defended from the savage jungle in the global south, effectively. Or when the Ukraine invasion started, Commission President von der Leyen standing up and saying, we will sanction Russia until, with the worst sanctions that have ever been witnessed by humankind, until we crush them. But when the genocide starts in Gaza, you had her flying right over there to stand side by side with the Israeli leadership to say that Europe stands with Israel, right up, carte blanche, we right up to including and past the point of genocide. And we've seen that play out. I suppose the way they talk about militarization over there would make Micheál Martin blush. But even though, successive Irish governments will go out of their way to assure the Dáil, the Irish public, the Irish media, that there is no such thing as a new army, and there's not going to be. And even if there was, the Irish Defence Forces would have nothing to do with it. But over there, they have been talking about the EU army for years and years and years. Jean-Claude Juncker, the Commission President, talking about Lisbon, said that the EU army and PESCO and these kind of military structures that were born out of the Lisbon Treaty, he said this is the sleeping beauty of the Lisbon Treaty. He said this quite a time ago. And when they talk about the EU army, they talk about it as if the Irish Defence Forces are already in it. And we had an example of this back in January when the new High Commissioner for Foreign Affairs, Kaja Kallas, was at this was January, and she was at the annual conference of the European Defence Agency, and she stood up and she said, we do not need one European army, we need 27 European armies that can work together effectively to deter our rivals and defend Europe, preferably with our allies and partners, but alone if necessary. So in this formulation from Callas, Ireland is standing shoulder to shoulder with this European army of armies as they tool up to get together to deter or whatever the rest of the world, and preferably with NATO, but alone if necessary. This new Parliament and Commission are taking militarisation to new heights, and they are, so we are told in the media, getting impatient with neutral Ireland. So you might remember a couple of months ago there was an article in the journal.ie, a leak. I cannot believe there was a leak. It was a plant. It was like sort of giving notice to the Irish public. But the headline of this, it was a leaked briefing for the incoming Minister for Defence, Simon Harris, about attitudes of the Europeans to Ireland and our policy of neutrality. And the headline for the article was, "Redacted briefing for the new Minister of Defence suggests EU impatience on Ireland's neutrality." And it was like this series of inadequately redacted sections from the briefing, but the media bit was as follows. "This is the challenging context facing Ireland in terms of our engagement with the EU on defence matters. Hitherto this, Ireland's position and those of other military neutral states, has been accepted. However, the changing geopolitical climate, the accession of the previously military neutral states of Finland and Sweden into NATO, and the resulting increased focus on defence industry and wider defence matters will likely result in a lower tolerance or understanding of this position into the future." So the EU is getting impatient with Ireland. They will not accept our neutrality anymore, and they are losing tolerance and understanding of our position. I mean, where do you start? The EU has no competence when it comes to our foreign affairs. That is solely a matter for our government and our people. It does not matter what they think about our neutrality. And nor should we be concerned with what they think about our neutrality. And we clearly aren't. So like, no matter how manipulative the question is. Do you want to read the question?
Yeah. So like I was saying earlier, there's been an awful lot of stuff in the media about, you know, our neutrality is outdated and we should be ashamed of it. Actually, Carol, you're here and you wrote a letter to the Irish Times on this. But there was an opinion poll that was published in the Irish Times on neutrality and where we stand on it. And the questions were really, they were really loaded. And so this particular question is, do you support Ireland's current model of military neutrality, or would you like to see it change so that Ireland can take more responsibility for its own and Europe's defence? Now, so are you responsible and want to go to war, or are you irresponsible and would like to keep ourselves out of war and have peace? And actually, Carl, this was the one where you wrote the letter, I think.
I think the other one mentioned the Soviet veto.
Oh, the Russian veto.
Oh, do you want to let us be vetoed by Russia?
Yeah.
Was the way it was put.
Maybe that was the other question, because all of the questions were totally loaded. Carl wrote an excellent letter in response to the Irish Times, and of course they never published it. And actually, Carmel, who's also in the room, then turned it into an Instagram post, because we didn't know how to use Instagram. And then Carmel turned it into an Instagram post and it went viral. We got thousands of likes for Carol's letter, so fair play to Carol. But this is just an example of just how loaded the questions are, and even still Irish people are proud of our neutrality and understand the value of it, despite all of the the rhetoric coming at us that we should abandon it.
Thank you. I suppose the problem is we have leaders who care less about what the Irish public think, their constituents and the people they're supposed to represent, care more about what the EU thinks and what the EU arms industry think. And the EU is very clear now what they think. They want to turn the entire European project into a militarised union, and they've been stepping on the throttle in the recent months. So in the beginning of March, we had Commission President von der Leyen come out with her Rearm Europe plan, a package of measures that envisages EU defence spending rising to 3.5% of GDP, or 650 billion euros. Added to that, there's a loan investment fund for research and development in the arms sector for 150 billion euros, so 800 billion. That will be, it's going to be loaned, borrowed off the international markets. So effectively what we're going to see is another round of austerity across Europe, to militarise it. On March the 19th, EU Commission adopted a white paper strategy for rearmament, and it's worth reading if you haven't read it. It's a crazy document. It's really paranoid. There's threats abound. Russia is just about to invade Europe at any second. Big bad China is on the rise, and that's a security threat for Europe. Wherever we look, our interests are challenged, and the only rational response, according to this strategy, is massive, like colossal spending on weapons. There's no vision of like diplomacy or peace or dialogue. It's just off the table. Ironically, this document, the strategy, was published at the same time. Evil Russia were sitting down with our hero Ukraine and Russia and the Americans to hammer out a ceasefire deal. Whether anything comes to that, who knows? But all wars end at a table. But in Brussels, there's no such thing as dialogue. It's just not possible. We need to just tool up. So Germany has amended the debt brake to allow hundreds of billions extra on defence spending. The new Chancellor Merz says we're going to spend whatever it takes to get Germany up to speed and be able to defend Europe. And you see, like this, it's just like it's a free-for-all, And top German economists are saying that over the coming 5 years, you're going to have 400 billion extra Germany spending on defence sector. And then 500 billion is going to be spent on military mobility. So, roads, bridges, rail, everything you need to get all the infrastructure necessary to get all the new weapons they're going to get to the war, wherever that's going to be. But, they never say exactly where they will that into being, And then conscription in Germany is on the cards again. So a big talking point in the elections, you might have noticed, was conscription. Now many of those people who are in favour of it are sitting in the Bundestag. And it's, there is a debate inside Germany, and it's a bit complex, and there is resistance to it, but the government is very willing to bring this into being. And all municipalities across Germany are currently registering all men, women and everybody else to see if they're fit for the army. And you have the German military visiting play schools and primary schools and secondary schools all the time. They bring along their big tanks and their big machines and sort of go, you can be a hero like us when you grow up. Get that kind of ideology of militarism into the children nice and young, because they have to have, if they're going to spend the bones of €1 trillion over the next 5 years, and that's, this stuff never ramps down, it's always going to be, this curve has been going since 2000, especially in Europe, there was a 10-year kind of flat line, and then 2016 it just goes like that, and now the curve is just getting sharper, and it's just going to get sharper. With this trajectory we're going on. I mean, these moves are a response to a kind of request or orders from NATO, really. When Trump came back in, and I don't want to focus on Trump, he's just a symptom of, whatever's wrong with that entity over there. When Trump came back in, he said that, similar to when he came back, when he was in the first time, in 2017, in May, he came to Europe and he met all the European leaders for the first time, and he said, you've got to pull your weight. You're not pulling your weight. You're freeloaders on us. The same message that we get from Europe, or as Ireland, Trump was relaying to the Europeans in general, saying NATO is kind of doing all your work for you. You need to double your spending. And back then, defence spending across the EU as a percentage of GDP was around 1. And now, 8 years later, Trump comes back and it's 2. In fact, it's 1 point. Wait, exactly when he came back, it was 1.9. It's on the way up. So Trump said, increase it to 5 now. And that was kind of a little bit dramatic, I think, for many European states. And the leader of NATO, the Secretary General Mark Rutte, came to the European Parliament to kind of translate Trump's demand. And he said, okay, the real NATO spending target is more like 3.7% of GDP. Still, colossal sums. And then that's kind of translated by the Commission into 3.5, with add-ons, obviously. But Mark Rutte was very clear about where this money should come from, and he told the Parliament when he came, he said, on average, European countries easily spend up to a quarter of their national income on pensions, health and social security systems, and we only need a small fraction of that money to make defence much stronger. So, the Irish government is clearly following the EU and NATO lead on this matter. There's a new arms industry lobby group that's been set up in Dublin that are dreaming about all the funds to be drawn down from these new funds coming from the EU. The Ditch have documented how the department is keeping its correspondence with these lobby group, the lobby group confidential. The lobby group in question is headed up by Ben Tonera and others from UCD. and they're called the Irish Defence and Security Association, the IDSA. And they count among their membership, genocide profiteers, Lockheed Martin and Patria, and there's Saab and a whole bunch of lovely people. In correspondence with the Information Commissioner, the department admitted that the information or support that the IDSA provides the department influences and informs direction taken by the Department of Defence. So here we are, spending hundreds of millions on new fighter jets and anti-tank missiles. We're going to buy some boats off New Zealand, a big boat off New Zealand that we don't have the naval staff to operate. We're looking at a deal with the French for 600 million for armoured vehicles. I mean, the list goes on. Every week there's a new, some new purchase in the defence kind of literature. And then at the same time as this is going on, there's this relentless, as Niamh was saying, there's this relentless kind of attack in the media. And you have the likes of Kildare, who Niamh debated yesterday, and Malcolm Byrne, kind of all over the airwaves. These people who have had meetings with this defence lobby, and Malcolm Byrne had an all-expenses-paid trip to NATO headquarters recently that he had to declare in the Dáil. And then they're on the airwaves, and all they talk about is Russia, Russia, Russia. Russia's going to invade Europe. Putin himself ordered the attacks on the HSE, crazy stuff, and they're obsessed with these Microsoft's and Facebook's cables off the west coast of Ireland. It's just threat inflation. And the mad thing is, Niamh debated Malcolm Byrne on Waterford City Radio a couple of weeks ago, and she was just dismantling his arguments piece by piece, because none of it makes any sense what they're doing when it comes to the triple lock. The kind of rationale just falls apart with any scrutiny. And then he just started calling her a Putin puppet. That was his go-to, It's like, if all else fails, Putin puppet. It's tried and true.
Yeah, maybe just to come back in then on the triple lock stuff. So the European Union has been rolling out missions since effectively the Nice Treaty came into being. If they're training missions and there's no UN mandate, we can still go because training missions, but there is a restriction on sending Irish troops to fully fledged military missions. So for example, the battle groups, people might have heard of the EU Battlegroups, we can deploy to participate in the training missions, and we participated in the EU Battlegroup training mission in March, at the end of March into the middle of April in Hungary. While Irish troops, 139 Irish troops, were in Hungary on an EU battle group, Benjamin Netanyahu was also in Hungary. And we were participating in a battle group training exercise that was being led by the Germans. So here we are in Hungary, a country that's receiving a man that's wanted by the International Criminal Court for crimes of genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes. He's in the country while we're in the country, effectively, and we're being involved in a battle group training exercise being led by Germany, a country that's formally backing Israel at the International Court of Justice. So why is Ireland, as a neutral country, aligning ourselves with countries that are totally fine and not even just fine, willing to back a genocidal regime, back it at the world's top court? We can participate in those training missions, but we cannot be deployed. So we heard recently that Kaja Kallas, the EU's foreign and defence spokesperson or representative, high representative, she said last week with celebratory tones that the battle groups are now operational and they're ready for deployment. So the plan is to send them God knows where, but the European Union is dying to send a battle group somewhere. And these battle groups, with the triple lock, Ireland cannot go. So if tomorrow the European Union decides to send a battle group into Ukraine, for example, Ireland cannot deploy because there would be no UN mandate. We assume that there would be, that would be blocked at the Security Council by Russia. And so what role would Ireland have then? If it were to go on one of these EU battle groups, imagine that they send them imagine the triple lock is gone, and Ireland deploys on an EU battle group into Ukraine, for example, and Russia then takes aim at that EU battle group. we are effectively in a direct conflict or confrontation then with Russia and nuclear power. So we hear an awful lot about the alleged threats from Russian ships out in the Atlantic, but we don't hear anything at all about the threat that might come to us, you know, if we decide to deploy on Keir Starmer's coalition of the willing, or on von der Leyen's battle group into Ukraine or wherever else. So, you know, we're really getting ourselves into very dangerous territory. Any mission that takes place outside of a UN mandate is not a peacekeeping mission. It simply is not. It's not a peacekeeping mission with a mandate from the only multilateral organisation that is tasked with peace and security, that being the UN. The European Union has interests, and they're very clear. They have 4 pillars in their foreign policy, and the 4th pillar is to look after European interests. I mean, they spell it out very clearly. So revoking the triple lock will effectively see Irish people being sent off to fight in these battle groups. We already take part in the training missions, but we can't be deployed because of the triple lock. Once the triple lock goes, Irish people will be sent off to fight in foreign wars. And we'll be coming back with, you know, missing limbs, with body bags, with, you know, trauma and all of that stuff. Why would we think we would be, you know, exempt from that or escape that if the government has been very clear that that's the direction that they're going in? So that's why we've rolled out the roadshow. We're really fearful of, and just maybe to mention that the event we had in Cavan, we had 5 or 6 teenagers in the room who came along because they had heard about the triple lock and they wanted to ask us questions, and they did. And there was something really, urgent, I suppose, about the discussion, because you're thinking, well, these people in the room, they might be the ones that are sent off. And also, as we've been going around the country, we've seen ads for the army recruitment all over the place. So when we were in Kinmare, we started in Kinmare in a secondary school. And the first thing we saw in the secondary school as we went in the door was an army recruitment poster in the secondary school in Kinmare. Then we went on to Clare, and we went to the Clare tip match, because I'm a Clare woman, and we lost. But Clare were playing tip in the hurling, and in the programme for the hurling, the GAA match, in the middle of the programme was a recruitment ad for the army. We saw it on bus stops in Cork, on the back of buses in Dublin. So there's, you know, really ramping up recruitment. And, you know, this is a strategy that, I was going to read you a quote, but this is a strategy that the government has been rolling out for a while. And this is just a quote to give you an idea of the lengths that they're willing to go to get people into the army and then to send them off to these wars. So in 2022, the Commission on the Defence Forces suggested, this is a recruitment strategy from the Defence Forces Commission, suggested, quote, a range of proactive measures be taken to increase recruitment, including engaging with sports clubs and other voluntary bodies, especially in areas challenged by poverty or isolation. So that, it's very clear, the direction of travel. We're trying to get people from poverty and isolated, challenged areas into the army, and we're at the same time removing all sorts of protections and safeguards that they would be sent only on peacekeeping missions, and we're preparing the groundwork to send them on EU battlegroups and potentially NATO-led missions. So, yeah, I think we'll finish with that, and hopefully we'll get questions and comments